Okay, we're on DAF Zayin Amid Aleph, and the first wide line. There was a statement that was made by Rav. Rav had said on the previous Amud, he had said, BEITZA im Yitziasa nigmara, that an egg, as it emerges from the hen, is completed. The question that the Gemara had is, what does that mean and what are its ramifications? The Gemara had previously suggested that this has to do with commercial issues. In issues of commerce, when you're selling eggs to a person, are you selling an egg to a person with the consumer's intention that this should be able to hatch into a chick? If so, by selling him an egg that is an ova egg, that is harvested from a slaughtered chicken, you're misrepresenting the egg. And that was one of the issues having to do with mekach umemkar. But now the Gemara is going to go back to its original premise that it has to do with the laws of Yantif. What is really the ramification that an egg is completed upon its emergence from the hen? And what it means to say is that vis-a-vis the laws of Yantif, once the majority of the egg has emerged from the hen, even if it gets sucked back in afterwards, I guess which could happen, like it partially lays the egg, and then it pulls it back in, and then later on, a few hours later, it lays it completely. That partial laying, as long as the majority of the egg emerged from the hen, is considered to be the moment of its being laid. And like Rabbi Yochanan had said, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, BEITZA sheyatzaru b'me'erev Yom Tov v'chazra muteres la'achla b'Yom Tov. That as long as the majority of the egg emerged from the hen before Yantif, even if it doesn't get fully laid until Yantif, it's not considered to be nolad. There's no problem of muktzah, and you're allowed to consume that egg on Yantif. V'ika da Amar, ma yim yitzias nigmara, im yitzias kula nigmara, im yitzias kula nigmara, im yitzias kula in, aval rubalo ulafu kimid Rabbi Yochanan. Some say that Rav's statement was actually coming to disagree with Rabbi Yochanan, that only after the egg completely emerges from the hen, that it is completely laid, is it considered to be finished, meaning that it's a laid egg. And anything before that, even if the majority of the egg has emerged, that's not considered to be laid yet. It's not considered to be completed. And therefore, this statement of Rav is coming to disagree with Rabbi Yochanan, because whereas Rabbi Yochanan holds as long as the majority comes out, it's a laid egg, Rav says the whole of it has to come out in order for it to be laid, and thus such an egg, according to Rav, will be asur on Yantif. If it's partially laid before Yantif, then it gets sucked back in, and then gets fully laid on Yantif. Gufa. So let's go back to a Gemara that we had discussed yesterday. Hashochedes atarnagoles umatzaba beitzim gemuros mutaros laachlan bechalav. That if you slaughter a chicken and you find ova eggs in the chicken, meaning the eggs have not been laid yet, but they are completely they've come to term. They're just awaiting to be laid. So you're allowed to eat those eggs in milk. They're considered to be parv because they're completed eggs. Rabbi Yaakov Omer im hayamuros begidin asuros, and Rabbi Yaakov qualifies that, and he says they have to be so completed that they are no longer attached with veins to the chicken. But if they are still attached by veins to the chicken, so then they are considered to be part of the chicken, to the point where we have to consider them to be fleishik. Now, of course, you know that this is all a rabbinic law, because chicken and milk midioraisa is permitted. Right? So this is all a rabbinic law on top of the rabbinic law that chicken is fleishich and cannot be eaten with milk. Right? So in addition to that, we say that if an egg is still attached to the chicken to the point where you can see the veins attaching the egg to the chicken's reproductive system, so then that egg is also considered to be fleishich and you cannot eat it with milk. So now the Gemara says, Man tana lahadatanu rabbana. Who is the author of the following brisa? Ha'ochel minevelas of tahar, that if a person eats from the flesh of an avelas of tahar, bird carrion of a species of a bird which is kosher, has a unique halacha, that normally nevela is metame by touch, but a bird nevela is not metame through touch. This particular kind of bird nevela will only make you tame when you swallow a kazayas of that flesh. and it'll make you and anything that you're wearing tamei. It's a special gzeirus hakasuf, special din, and therefore the question is, what if I swallow a piece of this bird carrion, but the part of the bird that I swallow is not the normative flesh? It's not the wing or something like that. But what do I swallow? Min ashlal shel beitzim. If, let's say, I swallow a cluster of eggs, so I've got ova eggs that I open up in this dead bird, and they are attached to some kind of system which provides them with nourishment from the mother, which is called a shlal. And Rashi says that the word shlal is keshein kevushin ushlulin, right? They are all clustered together, ukevuin b'shedra, and they are attached to this sort of like a spine, really like a central vein that runs and attaches the eggs inside the womb. So if you eat that, or min ha'atzamos, or min hagidum, or min habasar, shenit l'shem achai, tohar. Or if you eat the bone of the bird, or if you eat the hard sinew of the bird, these are considered to be completely inedible. They're not really the flesh of the bird at all. Or if you eat flesh from the bird, but it was taken from the bird while it was still alive, and only then the bird died. So in all of those cases, since you're not eating the bird itself, you're eating something that's a byproduct of the bird, so then you do not become tamei, you're tahor. However, min ha'eshkol shel beitzim, min akur keban uvnei me'ayin, o shehimches achele v'gema tamei. However, if you eat the eshkol, which is the vine itself, the vein itself, I wonder if the word vein and vine are the same etymology, because they really, the word vein, the way that the Gemara describes it is that it's basically, it looks like a cluster of grapes, these eggs that are attached to a central vein. And therefore, if you eat from the vein itself, not the ova eggs, but you eat from the vein itself, or if you eat from the crop or the gizzard of the bird, or you eat from the intestines of the bird, or if you take some of its intestinal fat and you melt it and you drink it, so then in all of those cases you're tamei, because even though those are, let's say, non-normative parts of the bird, but they're still considered to be part of the bird flesh itself, and therefore you do become tamei. So the Gemara's question is, Man Tana min hashlal shel beitzim tohar. Who is the author of this statement that if you eat from the ova eggs themselves, you're going to be tohar? Amar Rav Yosef, the lo Rabbi Yaakov. The ikar Rabbi Yaakov ha'amarim hayu mu'uros begidin asuros. It must not be like Rabbi Yaakov, because Rabbi Yaakov had said that as long as the ova eggs are still attached to the central vein, they're considered to be fleishichs. You can't eat them with milk, which means that they're part of the bird's flesh. And here you're telling me that it's not part of the bird's flesh, so that and that's why you don't become tamei. So this seems to be in conflict with Rabbi Yaakov.
We can have a chumrah in terms of basar kala.
So the Gemara is going to say there's differences. Amar le Abaye mimai. Where do you know this from? How can you maybe not so? Dilma adkan lo ka'amar Rabbi Yaakov hasam ela le'inyan isura aval le'inyan tuma lo. Maybe he only is machmir when it comes to basar b'chalav, but he's not machmir as far as declaring it the bird's flesh as far as tuma. Why would you make such a distinction? If you're going to be machmir by declaring it to be fleishichs as far as basar b'chalav, so declare it be machmir as far as tumah as well. The Gemara gives a very good reason. Afushe tumahu, v'afushe tumad midrabanan lo mafshinan. Because there's a liability when you declare something to be tamei, for rabbinically. There are times when the Chachamim declare something to be tamei midrabanan, but they do it sparingly. And the reason is because there's always a downside of increasing tumah within the Jewish people's community. You increase tumah, you make it more difficult for purification to be achieved. You also subject taharos and kodshim to tumah unnecessarily. You're going to cause holy things to be destroyed unnecessarily. So there are a lot of liabilities to declaring things tamei. And therefore the Chachamim are more hesitant to be gozer on tumah than they are to be gozer that something is fleishish.
But here you're not dealing with the Raizel. Here you're dealing with oath. Not even the Raizel of the cloud.
No. Nevelos, I believe that Nevelos of Tahor is a deoraisa. Sure, it's a deoraisa.
No, I'm talking about with the going back to the BEITZA.
Yeah.
Right, of the Ophos. That's midrabanan.
As far as what?
As far, I'm saying the whole thing of basar, of the basar of the oaf, is only midrabanan, right?
It's only considered to be the flesh of the animal midrabanan. So the Gemara is, as far as making it fleishes.
Yeah.
So the Gemara says, make it part of the flesh of the bird as far as tumah as well. So the Gemara said, we're not gozer tumah unnecessarily. We're more hesitant to be gozer to make something rabbinically tameh. To make it rabbinically fleishes as far as basar b'chalav, we are prepared to do. Mm-hmm. There's no downside to that. But to make something rabbinically tameh, we're more hesitant to do. V'ika da amri, man tana min ha'eshkol shel beitzim tameh, amar Rav Yosef Rabbi Yaakov, da amar im ha'im huras begidan asuros. There are others who learn the whole sugya differently. They look at the last part of the brisa, which says that if you eat the cluster of eggs, you're going to be tameh. Now, we had explained that the word eshkol over there means the central vein that is considered to be still part of the flesh of the bird. But according to this version, the word eshkol means the entire structure, both the vein and the eggs attached, the ova eggs attached to it. If you eat any part of it, you're going to become tameh. And therefore, Rav Yosef says that must go according to Rabbi Yaakov, because Rabbi Yaakov says that as long as the ova eggs are still connected to the central vein, they're considered to be fleishes. They're part of the flesh of the bird. Amar le Abaye mimai de eshkol mehanach detalya beeshkol dilma eshkol gufe. So Abaye says, how do you know that the word eshkol refers to both the central vein and the eggs that are attached to it? Maybe it's only referring to the central vein itself, and the eggs that are attached to it do not render you tameh. V'chitema eshkol gufe ma'ila memra. And maybe you'll ask me a question, well, if it's only referring to the central vein, then what's the point of telling it to me? That seems to be quite obvious that it's the flesh of the bird. So why would I think otherwise, that you wouldn't become tameh? Mida dahava korkabon v'nei me'ayin. The aflagav the baster ninu kevin the ika inchi lo achli. It's the richla ashmeina. The Gemara says very simply, take a look at the other examples in the brisa of things that you eat that render you tameh. The gizzard and the intestines. Now those are clearly part of the flesh of the bird. Why does the brisa need to tell me that when I eat them I become tameh? It's because since there are people who don't eat those parts of the bird, you might think that they're not enough of a food substance of the bird to render you tameh. So the brisa says no, they are. So hachanami keven diika inshi delo achli isrich lashmin. And so too, the central vein that provides nourishment to the ova eggs is not something that people would normally eat. And yet, since there are some people who will eat it, therefore that's enough of a food item to render you tameh, to say that you're eating the flesh of the bird. Tana Rabbana. Now we have a very interesting brisa, which really must have taken tremendous insight on the part of Chazal to really study. Is it ornithology? Is that the word for the study of birds, right? To be able to study the behaviors of birds and other creatures. Kol shetashmisho biyom nolad biyom, kol shetashmisho balayla nolad balayla. Any animal who cohabits with its mate during the daytime will give birth or will lay its eggs during the daytime, and any animal that cohabits at night with its mate will give birth at night. Kol shetashmisho bein bayom uvein balayla nolad bein bayom uvein balayla. And if an animal cohabits both at day and at night, then it will give birth either day or night. Kol shetashmishu b'yom nolad b'yom zutar negoles. So what's an example of a creature that only cohabits during the daytime? That's chickens. Chickens only cohabit by day, right? You don't have to worry that your chicken is out late at night. You tell your chicken, be back by 10 o'clock tonight. You don't have to worry it's going to be doing anything untoward, because chickens only cohabit by day. Right? And kol shetashmishu balayla nolad balayla zu atalev. What creature only cohabits at nighttime? That's the bat, because bats usually are just hanging on trees during the day, and they become swingers at night. Kol shetashmishu bein bayom vein balayla adam v'chol dedamile. But what's an example of a creature that cohabits both by day and night? Those are human beings and all similar creatures, meaning that there are many creatures that cohabit both by day. Probably most of the animal kingdom is cohabits both by day and night. Amar mar, kol shetashmish b'yom nolad b'yom zutar negolas l'may nafkamina. So first the question is, you tell me that chickens only cohabit by day, and therefore they only lay their eggs by day. Who cares What difference does this make? What is the halachic significance of such a statement? So the Gemara answers, L'chad Rav Morei Berei de Rav Kahana, Damar Rav Morei Berei de Rav Kahana, Badak Bekana Shel Tarnagolin Me Erev Yom Tov V'lo Matzah BAYTZA, U'Lamachar Hishkem U'Matzah BAYTZA Muteres. So the Rav Kahana made an amazing statement. He says, you check the nest right before Yontif starts. You can't find any eggs. Following morning, Yontif morning, in the pre-dawn hours, you check the nest, and lo and behold, there's an egg. So Rav Kahana said that egg must have been laid before Yontif, because chickens never lay eggs at night. So the fact that you found this in the pre-dawn hours is an indication that it was laid from yesterday, and therefore the egg is mutter. It's not noilad. It's the Gemara v'halo badak. You did, but you checked before Yantav. You didn't find anything before Yantav. So the Gemara answer is Emer lo badak yafe yafe. You must not have checked very well. Va'afilu badak yafe Emer yatsa saruba v'chazra havaychad Rabbi Yochanan. Alternatively, even if you checked well, the reason you didn't find the egg is because the hen had partially laid it. The majority of the egg had come out, and then it got sucked back in, and then it finished laying it at night. But since, like we said, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that's considered to be laid from the day before, that confirms our thesis. So the Gemara now says, Eini, is this really so? V'ha'amar Rabbi Yossi ben Shaul Amar Rav, Badak b'kana shel tarnagoles me'erev Yom Tov, v'lo matzah BAYTZA, u'lamachar hishkim u'matzah BAYTZA, asura. We have a completely contradictory statement from Rabbi Yossi ben Shaul in the name of Rav. Now, sometimes we'll say that this is a machlokas amoraim, but here, as you'll see, it's not a machlokas at all. Rabbi Yossi ben Shaul says that if you check the nest from before Yontif, and then you check the following morning on Yontif morning in the pre-dawn hours and you find an egg, then that egg is usher with the assumption that it was laid in the middle of the night. How could he say that if we've just stated that chickens don't lay eggs at night? So Hasan b'desafna me'ara. The Gemara answers, well, wait a minute. Chickens don't lay eggs at night when they cohabit. But there are some times that hens can lay eggs without previous cohabitation. And that is through, there must be a scientific term. When a chicken gets stimulated by rubbing in the earth, and that causes it to gestate an unfertilized egg. Bob, you know what I'm talking about? Okay. But most of the eggs that our chickens lay today are unfertilized eggs. Okay, they're produced that way. The eggs are cultivated that way, that they're stimulated, and that causes them to lay eggs without male fertilization. When that happens, when an egg is laid that way, because it's not a product of cohabitation, so then it'll lay the egg based on when it stimulated itself in the earth, not based on cohabitation. So ihachi de Rav Mori nami ema me'ara safna. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, then Rav Mori's statement is not reliable at all. Anytime an egg is laid, maybe it was from an unfertilized egg and there was no cohabitation. So the Gemara answers b'di'ika zachar bahada. So the Gemara answers because when there's a rooster present, a chicken will not forego male fertilization and male cohabitation. The hen will always go to the male to fertilize it, and will not stimulate itself in the earth. So therefore you can be assured that if there's a rooster on the farm and an egg is laid, then you know it was not laid during the nighttime. It must have been laid from before Yontif. So the Gemara says, B'di'ika zachar nami ema me'ara safna, but maybe it also stimulated itself even if there's a rooster present. The Gemara answers, Amar Ravina, Gemiri kol hecha di'ika zachar lo safna me'ara. We have studied chickens, and we know that whenever there's a rooster present, she's not going to do anything to stimulate herself if she has the opportunity to go to the male. And therefore there'll be for sure cohabitation, there'll be for sure a fertilized egg, and that egg will only be laid during the daytime.
Why did the Gemara have to repeat that? Didn't it just say it and then...
No, actually, I had foreshadowed it. Really what the Gemara had said is that when there's a male, you can assume that it was fertilized by the rooster. So the Gemara says, how can you make that assumption? Even when there's a rooster present, maybe it stimulated itself in the earth. The Gemara answers because not only will a hen subject itself to the male, but it will only subject itself to the male when the male is available. Ve'ad kama, how proximal to the hen must the rooster be for you to make that assumption? Now, how far will a hen travel in order to get fertilized by the male? Almost sounds like shidduchim today. How far will the girl fly in order to find a nice shidduch? So Amar Rav Gamda Mishmei Derav Kol Heicha Deshama Kale Biyamama. As long as she can hear the rooster crow during the daytime. The reason why we say daytime is because noise travels less distance during the day than at night. And Avad Rav Mari Uvda Ad Shisin Bate, and Rav Mari had paskin that the egg that he found in the nest on Yantif morning must have been surely laid from before Yantif, even though there was no rooster on the farm itself, but there was a rooster 60 houses away. He said that hen must have taken a long trip to find that rooster because she could hear the rooster. Now I'm going to suggest to you now that this Gemara is waxing metaphorically now to teach us a much deeper principle of human beings and maybe about the Ribono Shel Olam and Klal Yisrael. There's a lot more depth here that we won't have time to go into. Then the Gemara says, V'ika nahara lo avra. If there's a river to divide between the rooster and the hen's not going to cross the river. However, V'ika mavara avra. But if there's a bridge, right, then the chicken will cross the bridge to get to the rooster. Why did the chicken cross the river? To get to the rooster. Okay, V'ika meitzara lo avra. However, if it's a narrow bridge, which means that what they used to do to economize on building materials is that they would put a plank across a river, and then they would place a rope, so the way that human beings would cross is that you'd hang on to the rope for balance and you'd walk across the plank. So that's not something that a hen is going to be prepared to do. However, Havauvda va'avra amitzra. But there was once a case where the hen was so desirous for her male consort that it even crossed this narrow plank. So I think this is a metaphor for the Jewish people and HaKadosh Baruch Hu in some deeper way, but we won't go into that now. B'mayu kimta b'desafna me'ara, ma'irya borak kilo borak nami. So let's go back to the statement of Rabbi Yossi ben Shaul. He had made a statement that if you find an egg laid Yantif morning, then in the egg is aser, because you have to assume, since there's no male on the farm, that it was stimulated through by itself. It was an unfertilized egg and it was laid on Yantif. So the Gemara says if Rabbi Yossi Bar Shaul is machmir, then why does he have to tell you that it's only if you checked the nest before Yantif and you didn't find an egg, only there do you have to be machmir. L'cha'ora, if you're concerned that the animal was fertilized was an unfertilized egg, and therefore the egg could have been laid at nighttime, then even if you didn't check the nest from before Yantif, why aren't you choshesh for that? So the Gemara says, Kilo bodak ema me esmol havai. Because then you could be makel, since mux is only a din derabanan to begin with, be makel and say that assume that the egg was laid from before Yantif. It's only when you checked it right before Yantif and you didn't find an egg, and then you go to the pre-dawn hours the following morning and you find an egg, only there do you have to say that it was laid overnight and therefore the egg is aser. But the Gemara says, well, if you can be told to be makel, if you can be lenient and say that it was laid yesterday, even if you checked the nest before Yantif and you didn't find an egg, why can't you be told to be makel and say as follows? Like Rabbi Yochanan. Like Rabbi Yochanan, who says that maybe the egg emerged, the majority of the egg emerged before Yantif, it got sucked back in, and that's why you didn't find any egg in the nest. And then really the egg was majority laid from before Yantif and be told to be makel. So the Gemara says to Rabbi Yochanan lo shchiach. The answer is because Rabbi Yochanan's scenario is so uncommon that it's not enough of an argument to allow us to be makel. If we check the nest and there was no egg before Yantif, we can't say, well, maybe Rabbi Yochanan's principle took place. No, that's such an uncommon thing that you can't be tola. But you could be tola to be makel to say that if you didn't check the nest before Yantif and you just find it on Yantif morning, maybe it was already there from before Yantif. And Rabbi Yossi ben Shaul made another statement in the name of Rav, and we're just bringing this in because he's not known to make a lot of statements in the name of Rav. Hai tuma shechika sakanta legiluya. He had said that if you have ground up garlic into like a puree, and you leave it open overnight, you cannot eat that. It's a sakana. Because just like we're worried that mayim gluyim, that exposed water, could have had a snake inject its venom overnight, so too this garlic puree may have had a snake inject its venom overnight, and therefore it's going to present the sakana, so you're not allowed to eat it. Now we're finished with eggs. We're ready to go on to the next part of our Mishnah, which talked about the laws of chametz on Pesach. And the machlokis was, how much chametz do you have to consume in order to be liable for the isser of chametz on Pesach? Beis Shammai had said, su'or b'kezayis and chametz b'kikoseves. Beis Shammai is mekel. He says, only when you consume yeast is the shira kezayis. But for consuming chametz, you need to eat a larger shear in order to be liable, which is the size of a date. And Beis Hillel said, zu v'zu b'kezayis. Both su'or, yeast, and chametz, the measurement is a kezayis. And that's how we paskin. So first of all, let's try and understand Beis Shammai, because normally the shear is always kezayis. My tamayu de Beis Shammai. Because imkein lichtov rachmana chametz v'lo bois su'or, v'anaminu ma chametz she'en chimutz okasha b'kezayis, su'or she'chimutz okasha lo kol shekein. Because Beis Shammai looks at the Torah and he says, look, I note the fact that the Torah prohibits both chametz and it prohibits su'or. Why does the Torah have to explicitly prohibit both? Let the Torah only prohibit chametz. And if the Torah says that chametz, which has less leavening power than yeast, is prohibited, then surely yeast is, which has a very powerful leavening power, surely yeast is prohibited. So su'or dekasav rachmana lamali, lomar lecha shiur shel zeh, lo kishiur shel zeh. The reason why the Torah wrote it, therefore, is to teach me that the amounts, the measurements are different. And that's why the Torah has to explicate both. That su'or is asr b'kezayis, and chametz is asr with a kikoseves. Beis Hillel tzrichi. And by Beis Hillel respond, no, that's not a good argument. I'll tell you why the Torah needed to write both. The ikos of rachmana su'or, hava amina mishum dechimutz okasha. Aval chametz te'en chimutz okasha, emalo tzricha. And v'ikos of rachmana chametz mishum deroi lachila, bal sorshein roi lachila imalo tzricha. Beis Hillel looks at it this way. If the Torah would have only written su'or, I wouldn't have necessarily known chametz, because su'or may be prohibited because it has a much more powerful leavening power. Okay? And chametz maybe is not as prohibited. And if the Torah would have only written chametz, and this is the key point, then maybe the Torah only prohibits chametz because that's an edible product. Bread is edible. Yeast, people don't eat yeast. Normally they don't eat yeast. So maybe if the Torah would have only said, don't eat chametz, I might not have known that the Torah is also prohibiting me from eating yeast. And therefore comes along the Torah and says, don't eat yeast, to tell me that even though yeast is not normally edible, if you eat it, you're liable for eating a kezayis. So now it's interesting, because I just gave a shir about this on last Monday, if you can find it on Kosher too, when we talk about toiletries and cosmetics on Pesach. Why are many poskim more machmir? We know for sure that we're more machmir on Pesach with chametz than with other isurim, because with other isurim, as long as it's nifsal me'achilas adam, it no longer has the isser. As long as it's no longer edible to man, it's no longer asr. But with chametz on Pesach, it has to be nifsal me'achilas kelev. It has to be no longer edible to a dog in order for it to be mutter. So the Ran in Psachim says that the reason why we're more machmir is exactly because of this Gemara. Because this Gemara tells us the fact that the Torah prohibits yeast, which is normally not an edible product for human consumption, means that the Torah elevates the status of leavened things, to the point where even though they're not normally eaten, they're still prohibited. And that's why only when it's completely nifsal, when it's completely inedible even to a dog, does it leave the realm of the prohibition. But up until that point, it's still under the rubric of prohibited substance. So now the Gemara says, Beis Shammai les lehu de Rebbi Zera. So now the Gemara asks, wait a second, Beis Shammai don't hold of Rebbi Zera's principle. Rebbi Zera, we're going to see, is going to quote an explicit pasuk. The Amar Rebbi Zera, pasuk hakasav b'su'or v'siyim b'chametz, lomar l'chazeu su'or zehu chametz. That the Torah, the source is in Shmos Yud Beis. It says, Shivas yamim su'or li yimotzei b'vateichem. For 7 days you may not have yeast in your possession. Ki kol ochel machmetzes, because anyone who eats chametz will be cut off. So the pasuk began with su'or, with yeast, finishes with chametz, to tell you that they're exactly equivalent. How can Beis Shammai argue with the pasuk? The pasuk equates the two as far as their measurements. So how can Beis Shammai say that there are two different measurements? The Gemara answers, Le'inyan achila kol yamalo pligi, ki pligi le'inyan biors. The Gemara tells us a very important clarification. When it comes to eating, everyone agrees that the measurement for both yeast and chametz is a kezayis. The machlokus is, what is the measurement whereby I am liable if I have not disposed of it and I still have it in my possession on Chametz, on Pesach? That's where Beis Shammai says you're not liable until you have a kikosevis size of chametz or a kezaya size of soor, and Beis Hillel disagrees and says ownership of chametz is usher with the size of a kezayas, either for yeast or for leaven. Beis Shammai savri lo yalfinan bir me'achila, Beis Hillel savri yalfinan bir me'achila. And the machlokas is Beis Shammai say that you can't compare the prohibition of eating to the obligation of disposal. And Beis Hillel say no, the two are exactly the same. You learn one from the other. Itmar nami. This is confirmed by the following statement. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, machlokas le'inyan bir v'le'inyan achila divrei hakol zeh v'zeh v'kezayis. He says it explicitly. The only time there's a machlokas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel is as far as ownership. How much must I own in order to be liable? That's where there's a machlokas. But as far as eating, everyone agrees that both yeast and leaven is a kezayis. Tanya nami hachi, the Brisa says the same thing. The pasuk says v'lo yeira'eh lecha chametz v'lo yeira'eh lecha se'or b'chol givulecha. The Torah says as far as the prohibition of ownership, it puts chametz and yeast in the same pasuk. Zeu machlokas shebein Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. This only when it comes to ownership is there a machlokas between Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. Shebeis Shammai omrim se'or b'kezayis v'chametz b'kikoseves. Ubeis Hillel omrim zeh v'zeh b'kezayis. That Beis Shammai say with as far as the ownership prohibition is where Beis Shammai say that the measurements are different, that with chametz it's a koseves, and with soor it's a kezayis, and Beis Hillel say in both cases it's a kezayis. Let's go on. Now we go to the next part of the Mishnah, which is hashochet chayav ha'of b'yom tov. We know that there's a mitzvah of kisui hadam, of covering the blood of a slaughtered animal that's venison or a bird that has to be covered. You have to cover the blood with earth. And we know that there's a problem with doing that on Yom Tov because the earth is muktzah. There may be other issues with the earth. So therefore we had a machlokus between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai had started off the Mishnah and said, go right ahead, slaughter the animal and do kisei hadam. And Beis Hillel had said, no, you can't do it unless you've already got dirt or earth prepared from the day before. So we're going to analyze and clarify this machlokus. Hashochet diyevet in lechatchila lo. The word hashochet, which means he who slaughters, implies that you've already slaughtered the animal, the bird, let's say, and now your dilemma is you don't have earth. So what should you do? So it seems like we're talking about b'di'evet, but lechatchila you're not supposed to slaughter a bird if you don't have earth prepared. But ema seifa. But then take a look at the second part. Beis Hillel omrim lo yishchot michlal detana kamas over yishchot. Beis Hillel is the only one who say lechatchila don't shecht. So it sounds like the previous Tana, Beis Shammai hold that even lechatchila you're allowed to shecht. So how do you reconcile it? So halo kasha lo yishchot v'yachasa ka'amar. No, what Beis Hillel, when they say don't shecht lechatchila, mean don't shecht and do kisei hadam lechatchila. But really, at this point, the Gemara is entertaining that both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel say lechatchila you shouldn't shecht, and the only machlokus is that according to Beis Shammai, once you've shechted, do kisei hadam, and Beis Hillel say once you've shechted, do not do kisei hadam. Well, wait a minute, ema seifa. But now let's look at the last part. Umodim shimshachat shiachbar b'deka v'yachasa michlal dereisha lav diyevedu. But one second, it says explicitly in the last part of the Mishnah that everyone agrees, both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree, that if you already did shecht, then you should dig with a shovel and cover with earth. So you see clearly here that what you've just described as the machlokas can't possibly be. The first Tana, Beis Shammai, must be saying that lechatchila you're allowed to shecht. So Amar Rabba hachi ka'amar. So therefore you have to explain the Mishnah as follows. The language. Hashochet shebali malech ketzad omrim lo. That if a person is a shoichet, not hashochet meaning he who has slaughtered, but rather a person who is a slaughterer. The word shoichet could mean, it could be a verb, it could be a noun. So here it's explaining that it is a noun. The name of the person who shechts is the word shoichet. He is a shoichet, and he's coming to us to ask us what should he do. So we tell him, what should we tell him? So Beis Shammai omrim, omer lo shchot chafor v'chasei. We tell him, go ahead, shecht the animal, go ahead, lechatchila shecht the animal, then dig up some earth, and then do kisei adam. Ubeis Hillel omrim lo yishchot elim ken hayelo afar muchan mi ba'od yom. And Beis Hillel disagree, and they say, no, you may not slaughter unless you had earth prepared from the day before. So if a guy comes to us with a shaila, says, Rabbi, I want to shecht this animal, what should I do? We tell him, did you prepare earth from the day before? No. I'm sorry, you cannot shecht. Rav Yosef Amar Hachikam. Rav Yosef now has a slight modification. He agrees in principle to Rabbi that that's the correct interpretation, but he has a slight differentiation. Here it is. Hachikam Hashochet Shabal Lihimalech Ketzad Omrim Lo. When a person comes to us and asks us what should he do, he wants to shech the chicken. What do we tell him? Beishamai Omrim Omer Lo Lech Chafor Shechot V'Chasei. It's almost exactly the same as Rabbi, but with one very important difference. Here, Rav Yosef says, first we tell him to dig up earth, then we tell him to shecht, and then we tell him to do kisei hadam. The difference is that according to Rabbi, we tell him first shecht and then dig up the dirt. And according to Rav Yosef, first we tell him to dig up the earth, and then we tell him to cover, and then we tell him to shecht. What's the difference? We'll explain. Perhaps you and Rabbi, your colleague, are arguing about Reb Zera's halacha. What's Reb Zera's halacha? That whenever you shecht and you want to do kisei hadam, you have to put a layer of earth underneath the blood and a layer of earth over the blood. And how do I know this? That you shall slaughter and pour its blood and cover it in earth. It doesn't say pour the blood, pour dirt over the blood, but rather cover it within earth. That this teaches me, says Reb Zera, the letter Beis is within the earth, means that you have to put a layer underneath the blood and a layer over the blood. Damar islay de Rabbi Zera, v'Rabba leslay de Reb Zera. So the machlokus is that you, Rav Yosef, who say that first you dig up the earth and then you shecht and then you do kisei hadam, is because you hold that there has to be a layer like Reb Zera underneath the blood. So you have to dig up the earth first to create that first initial layer, put the blood, then shecht, so the blood will go on top of the first layer, and then put a second layer over it. And Rabbi holds, no, I don't hold of Reb Zera's halacha. I just require that you put the earth on top of the blood, but there doesn't have to be earth underneath the blood. So Amrlei, no. Bein ledidi, bein l'Rabbi, Islam de Rebbe Zera. B'hacha b'hakam af laginan. So Rav Yosef said to him, no. Rabbi agrees to Reb Zera's halacha, that there has to be a layer lechatchila of earth underneath the blood. But the machlokas is as follows. Rabbi savar yika afar lamata in ilo lo. That Rabbi holds that you need to have a layer of earth underneath first. And if you don't have that layer of earth underneath, we don't give you permission to shecht. And the reason why we don't is to tell you to go dig up earth lechatchila before you've shechted, we don't give you permission to do. Why? Because we're worried that after you dig up the earth and you've done an act of either a malacha or handled muksa unnecessarily, you have done an unnecessary act, because maybe you'll change your mind and maybe you'll decide after you've dug up the earth that you're not going to shecht. So we don't allow you to dig up the earth. So if you have a layer of earth present already, then go ahead and shecht and then cover it with a second layer. But uladidi, but I hold differently. Ha adifa di ilo sharis le asil imnui misimchas yom tov. But I hold no. My perspective is that if we don't give you permission to dig up the earth before you shecht, you might say to yourself, all right, so then I can't shecht, I don't have a layer of earth, and you're not going to have simchas yom tov. So I hold, says Rav Yosef, that there's a greater imperative of simchas yom tov, of enjoying yourself by having fresh chicken on yom tov. That's more important to me than it is to have that existent layer of earth before. So therefore, I give you a heter. I tell you to go and dig up the earth before you've actually shechted, with the assumption that you'll go ahead and eventually shecht. And I'm not as concerned about the fact that you may change your mind and not end up shechting, because lamaisa, I have more of a concern that you should have simchas yantiv than I am concerned that you're going to end up changing your mind. Have a wonderful day.